How about a couple of summary wrap-ups regarding several things from the last few tapings? I was going to just remind you of in one-liners, such as the ultimate strength, and especially, but not limited to, but especially in matters intellectual. The ultimate strength is in variation and not duplication. And all attempts to help harm, all attempts to change reinforce. And you might specifically note, although we've talked about this on several occasions, all attempts to help causing harm by their own definitions, and all attempts to change simply reinforce the status quo. Just such is the nature, such is the chemical, physical, electrical, psychological, and mathematical nature of 3D Punch and Judy reality. I wanted to add that in, at least any of you were so weak, sunstroke, taking out the garbage, to ever think that such ideas as all attempts to help eventually harm, to think that in some way those are psychological quirks in the makeup of just individual men and women here or there. It has to do with the chemical, mathematical, physical, electrical, psychological nature of existence, as long as it is defined and operational as 3D Punch and Judy show, with two or more apparent players and one actor. A source of fewer dimensions than the visible forces. And those of you who are really good, a source that is multiples of the visible players, which of course is the same thing. And one more that we were touching on is to realize that whatever they may be, anti-words, anti-thoughts, have got to be variations in some new direction and cannot be mere inverted reflections of the original. Or if you'd like that in an additional one-liner, only a parent will recognize an antonym as a legitimate offspring. That's all. Not to give anybody the blues, put it to you another way. The reflection of the duck is illegitimate as a bastard to everyone except the duck. I won't make some snide comment like I'm glad I cleared that up. Having dispensed with the harmless preface, let's move on and pretend that this is tonight. Now, on many occasions when we have been taping, we have apparently discussed the matter of energy and change. But how about the unexpected? After you considering the matter of energy and change, one might then lazily assume that it takes no energy to keep things unchanged. Right? Caramba, neighbor. No. It takes all of the energy that everyone has. I see, I don't really have to say, think about it. But I could say, let's all silently repeat that to ourselves. To keep things unchanged takes gestures. This is up to 102 intermediate, but some of you can handle it. To keep things unchanged takes all of the energy that everybody has. That's why everyone is so tired. And if you think so tired is hyperbole, why everyone is adequately tired. We do not hear cries in the streets. We do not hear moans coming from psychiatric emergency rooms saying, "Doctor, rabbi, priest, friend, someone help me. I have excessive energy." Everyone is sufficiently tired, which actually translates, once you begin to see it, why everyone is so tired. It's also why you might note that you seem to have almost no spare change, no extra energy to devote to try and pursue your own revolutionary ends. Well, after having got some of your energy loop's attention, let's go back and let me try the opening of the paragraph again. Would it not seem patently, indubitably obvious, without any immediate analyzation, that if we were going to talk about, even at a fairly ordinary level, if we're going to talk about trying to change in life, trying to break habits, trying to better yourself, if we were talking on an institutional level of large groups of people trying to change, then we would have to talk about the matter of energy. You would have to do it down at the absolute physical, chemical level if we were talking about something other than microbiology. You would have to talk about energy, or else we're talking about that which is inert. So energy, to change anything, to change coal into heat, to change gas into energy, requires energy itself. So there could be no discussion on any level, all the way from the elemental all the way to the more complex. It would have to do apparently with microbiology, humans. You cannot talk about change, conversion of any kind, without talking about energy. Just would be foolish. But then if you were narrowing the view to humans attempting to change, to whatever might be the verbal description, trying to expand their awareness, trying to be able to take both hands and do that, trying to increase their consciousness, trying to better themselves, trying to change in some profitable manner, then you would very specifically have to talk about energies. You would have to talk about how a person lives, the kinds of foodstuffs that they do or do not put in their body, whether they're on drugs, whether they eat well, whether they eat a balanced diet, whether they're emotionally dysfunctional, whether they have some family member, some loved one whipping up on them emotionally, as they would say. You would have to discuss all of that, and it would seem to require, without any doubt again, without any analyzation, specific amounts of new energy, reconverted energy, redirected energy for a person to undertake any attempt to change. If you decided, I am putting on weight, there is no doubt I am going to get up. I haven't been doing it for years, but I'm going to get up every morning and start running 3 miles. If you indeed get up an hour early than you have been for years, and you get up and you go out and run, then by any horizontal, three-dimensional city definition, you are having to use new energies. You're having to divert energies. You're having to take the energies that you would have expanded laying in bed for another hour, and now you've got to get them up. You've got to draw energy from somewhere else. So it takes energy to try and do something as simple as get more exercise, to lose weight. It requires energy to lose energy. That is, to lose weight, which is simply a form of energy. It's all fat is, you know that. So it requires energy. But then, if I had asked in some more devious way, the ordinary intellect would have come again to the non-analytic conclusion immediately that simply to keep things as they are requires no real expenditure of energy. That is, if you are sitting there tonight and you decide, I am putting on weight, I am going to get up and run, I'll get up an hour early. Then you sit there and you have another couple of slices of pizza And just before you go to bed, you look at the clock and you look at when you normally get up at, say, 7:30, and it's all you can do to do that. And now you see your own hand, a hand that used to be your friend, reaching over there, about to turn the alarm setting to 6:30. And you think about it a second and you think, suck that. And you decide not to. And if I had said in some way, well, does it require any energy to keep things as they are? The answer is no, obviously. Well, it takes some energy to live, and it takes some energy. I'm burning up a certain amount of calories lying in bed each hour. But to say that it requires, or to ask me if it requires energy more than I'm expending now, just to be alive and do whatever I'm doing. In other words, if I'm not going to change any aspect of my life, to ask if it requires energy to keep things as they are, the answer, obviously, is no. You are obviously wrong, neighbor. It requires all of the energy you've got to keep things just as they are, you and everybody else. But how insane can that be if you were following all that? Because you've got to see that, let's assume that in some local manner I am tricking reason. Because although at first it sounds absolutely insane, non-sequential, looked at another way, it could not be more plainly logical and true to say that it takes all the energy you've got just to keep things as they are. And if you think no, then where is your extra energy? At the end of each day, if you've got a whole lot of energy and you have to file it away or you have to throw it out because it may spoil, are you having trouble at night that, well, I just can't go to sleep, I'm going out, well, I'll go down the street to that all night down to the Huddle House and I'll offer to work free. Is this the scheme of ordinary, sane people's life? No. We're not talking about useless temporary mutations outside the ordinary mainstream of human life. And we're not talking about people supposedly with psychological insomnia and all that. We're talking about ordinary people when it comes time and they look at the clock and realize I got to be up at such and such time, and if I go to bed right now, I'll get about 8 hours sleep. Throughout the middle, the fat part of the bell curve of all of humanity, everywhere, those people go, well, that's just about right. That's not too much at all. That is the story of their whole existence. That it requires all of the energy you've got just to keep things unchanged. Now, if you can get a clear picture of that, boy, I hate to repeat myself, but you people started. Wouldn't that explain more than you really, perhaps even ever wanted to know? Because the intellect, the way it is now dissecting, sketching the way life operates, is wired up, is primed up to think absolutely otherwise. If you ask people on the street, all the way from just an ordinary day laborer to someone in the world of academia, someone in the world of science, if you ask them, do you have any extra energy? And they say no. You might start off and say time, but then they'd understand energy. You could slip it right in. And if you said, well, could you do more if you had more energy? And they would all say yes, assuming they wanted to at all. But you would say, well, right now, if you wanted to make any great changes in your life, if you wanted to go back to school, if you wanted to try and perhaps move yourself closer to that dreamed of Nobel, would you not be working more? Would you not be coming in on weekends? Would you not be working later at night? Yes, I would have to. Can you? No, I can't. There is no more energy available. Just to hold what they've got, just to hold life together as it is, although the intellect will tell you otherwise, it takes all of the energy you've got not to change, but to keep from changing. If you would care for any more right-in-your-face examples, it's the kind of invisible, unrecognized, yet daily experienced examples of this. It's the energy needed I'm going to say you, of course, generically, ordinary people, the energy needed to disagree and critique. The energy needed to inflict pain and spread discord. I'm just talking about everyday goings on. Don't let your imagination. It's the energy required to re-subdue the submissive. It is the reconquering of the vanquished. Subcategories. It's the rethinking of the same thought, the feeling of the same feeling, the re-feeling. It is the moaning of the same moan. It is the whining of the same whine. It is the energy that is required for one to protect one's goods, merchandise, hobby trinkets, and of course especially to preserve your position in the arbitrage queue. That just about takes all the energy. I mean, that makes you tired to think about it. Because I believe I've covered everything important in anyone's life. But one aspect of it, may I be a little more specific in a verbal mapping. So when you have, and referring you back a little from last time we were taping, but when you are dealing with a three-dimensionally perceived world, when that's all of your perception is limited to that, and therein you have the situation wherein the reflection, the inverted reflection of any opposition, whether we're talking about people, ideas, the forces, chemically, electrical, magnetic, the laws of physics as they are taken now to be, which I will not argue. But within a three-dimensionally perceived world, all opposition, foes, remain no more than inverted reflections of the original. What this results in is that each day, at least, part of the day is spent reconquering already vanquished adversaries. All of those examples I gave can be placed neatly within that if you can see it. In a three-dimensionally perceived world, the inverted reflection of opposition / any foe appears to be, of necessity, appears to be a whole new foe. Daily. And I'm using daily metaphorically because it can happen minute by minute. But to take, as you're supposed to, the merely inverted reflection of a foe as being a new foe requires that each day, rather than have any possibility of extra energy or any spirit change, you spend every day at least a goodly amount thereof re-subduing that which has already been subdued. If that sounds too exotic, what in the hell is thinking the same thought again? Sound like the same thing to me. What is feeling the same thing that you've already felt about anything? Consider, let me give you another sideways example of re-fighting, reconquering a foe that was already conquered yesterday. Let me give you perhaps the prime example of that kind of foe, that kind of opposition. How many in here are Geminis? Good. See your doctor as soon as possible. I was going to say I was going to give you an example. It's really, believe it or not, it is a dichotomous example that I said was prime. But it's the same thing. It just won't sound that way if anybody ordinary happened to slip in and hear this. The prime example, of having to daily refight foes that apparently are new adversaries, but which are not, would be the example of the desire to change and the desire to be unchanged. Now I ask you, is that or is that not wondrous foes? That you've got your choice daily, which again can represent hourly. My foe is, of course, some ordinary people would call this, it seems to be my interest in life, my goal, my desire, is to change, to grow. Tomorrow, that same opposition, that same foe, that same place in which you want to move can invert itself, and it appears to be a new adversary. But there is no difference once you get past the three-dimensional world wherein the duck looks in the water and sees its reflection. Until you can get past that level, there is no difference. There is no operational difference between the reflection and the duck. It is not a new adversary just because it has been inverted. But if, this makes you feel better, I throw this in parenthetically, if anybody's following this based upon the silence, if you could see past that, and if you're following this even verbally, what would that do, I ask you rhetorically, to the general desire for humanity to get ahead? To perhaps if I could step on someone's feet or borrow, some of their goods, I could move up in line. But if you saw that the desire to do anything required constant attention, whether it was action or simply thinking of action, and it apparently arose daily fresh. And if you saw that, wait a minute, I'm fighting the same mother's son today that I did yesterday, but the son of a bitch has turned himself inside out. Maybe it is a Gemini. One day I think I'm fighting Punch, and the next day I think I'm wooing Judy. And it turns out that they're the same. If there was only one reasonable, if there was only one humanly perceived useful desire in life, and let's say that that would be to grow, to change beneficially, would that not be a fair, non-sectarian axiom to which we might get most city dwellers to agree? That if we said, leave out all ordinary, institutionally based notions of your culture, your race, your nationality, your religion, etc., would we not say that the most reasonable, the most humane, the most likely, the most livable goal for a human should be to change for the good? Would we not get most of humanity, thinking humanity's consensus? It's all right. If that were absolutely correct, if that were correct and operational beyond the 3D level, it would be self-slaughter for humanity. And it does not work that way. Because then if I ask, let's say all of humanity that is reasonable, in the middle of the bell curve, that they said, yes, we'll agree that the purpose of a man's life should be to grow, to change, beneficially. And then I said, how many people accomplish that? And I would suggest that then less than 100% of their hands would be raised. And if I addressed those with their hands not raised, and I said, well, why are you not accomplishing this? Then we began to have factional stories, as you know. That, so to speak, everyone would have their own reason as to, well, I want to change. I try to do better for my own self, for the sake of humanity. But I take what you suggested originally, that the purpose of man's life, a reasonable, thinking, decent person like I try to be, that the purpose of life should be, it's got to be, to try and change beneficially. And I say, and you agree that you have not really fulfilled that? Yes, I agree to that. Well, can you tell me why? Why do you think? And then you'd get into what appears to be the 1,001 individual stories as to why, all the way from, I'm sure, the immediate press of their individual circumstance to the good old reliance on childhood, subconscious traumas. But everyone would have a story. But can you see past what appears to be, or would appear to be, a kind of psychological reaction or description of this, and see that things are simply wired up in such a way that this idea that I suggested I could get all of humanity to agree to, which would be the middle of life's circulatory and respiratory system via man, get them agree that the purpose of life has got to be to change beneficially, to grow in a positive manner. And then, much less than a majority would agree that that is the story of their life. But then to see past the point that you and everyone else will say, well, the reason I don't is, and then you fill in a blank, which doesn't matter. You can fill in the blank and then light it, use it for a firecracker. If you saw that the purpose of trying to grow beneficially is indeed not the full telling of the story. The other story is to not change beneficially. That is just as hearty and vigorous for life's purposes as the more, to say the least, the more reasonable description of a man's life should be devoted to wanting to change. Maybe I should add another one, that all attempts to clarify muddy. Of course, that's not news, is it? I'll put it plainly, I guess some of you already see it. At the ordinary level at which energy runs through the human nervous system, at which it talks, you did not start it unless you are a superior person, way beyond our league. You did not start it. One day you turned around and you said, whoa! And this thing went, the purpose of life should be to change, to grow, to alter yourself for the good, to make adjustments that would be beneficial. Let us say that 50% of the people, if they were asked, would say yes, if I put it to them that way. I say, I'm changing the scene a bit. 50% of the rest of the people, I could say, if they knew how to hear this, I could say, the purpose of life, if there is one for man, the purpose of life has got to be this: to keep things from changing. 50% of humanity would go, yeah. Not with those words, but I'm not going to dick around with it. Things are not wired up. If you want to really play games, a sizable percentage of humanity throughout the years, I could put it to them that way and would say yeah. But that still doesn't matter. It could not be put in exactly those words, and to come up with what I suggest to you would be the correct mathematical, chemical, electrical, fractional percentage of all of reasonable humanity, the bourgeoisie of life's trunk, and that would be that 50% are wired up. The kind of description is not generally operational and definitive, but they are wired up in such a way that the goal of their life, as they feel it, is to be unchanged. And And it's the same thing. It's the same thing in as much as by now you should be able to recognize a great dance team and to realize that you cannot take dance competition, ballroom dancing, and pick out one of the partners. You cannot take one partner and have the dance continue. One partner is not more important than the other. The great adversaries, if you can see it when I said how marvelous they are, is not one adversary. It is not lethargy. It is not lack of energy. It is not being conservative. It is not being fearful of change. It is not being any of that. The two great unrecognized, remember, it's the one great foe. The one great foe, once you can see it, the one great foe is the desire to change and the desire to be unchanged. Now, all right, that helped a little, didn't it? Not to give anyone the blues, figuratively speaking, but do you understand, on that basis, how shall I put it? You can't bloody win. How about that? If indeed it was a non-rigged, a fair contest in which you were engaged, if it was a scene in which you or anyone else, but that you were in fair, valid competition with something, with life, with ignorant people, with people less enlightened than you, with conservative people, if it indeed were a fair contest and somebody had not already put out a contract on you, that is, the fix is already in, somebody has already been paid to take a dive. Now, of course, some of you at the ordinary level might say, well, at least I know it's not me. You got to understand. Just go back to Hollywood, since I don't have a holy book to refer you to. Go back to good old Hollywood movies, and you've got to consider how punch drunk a kind of tank fighter is already. Some of those guys took a dive and didn't even know it. So don't ever say, well, at least I know the fix ain't in on me. I'm not the one going to take a dive. There's a car route in there that goes like this. Everybody's going to take a dive. Just some people don't even get paid for it. Some people get nothing out of it. All right, back to what I was saying that you obviously are not going to get the blues from. But do you understand that you can't win as long as you're operating in the limitations of a 3D Punch and Judy world? That is, that there is something to oppose. There are foes in life. Maybe not spiritual, maybe not religious, maybe I, speaking as a city, sophisticated person, I'm too advanced for that. But there are foes to life. There's the resistance to change, for instance, politically, economically. They're the old fuddy-duddies. The Whigs, the Republicans, the right-wingers, the people who simply are too old, too set in their ways, that do not want to change. So there are obviously foes in life, whether they mean to be or not. You can cut it, you can dissect it, you can narrow it down verbally, you can even try and excuse the individual by saying, well, this is the kind of institutionalized reactionary behavior that has been set forth in men. That not all individual men are hostile to change, but it's a kind of institutionalized prejudice, chauvinism, provincialism, parochialism. It's just built into certain segments, so you can do that forever. You can almost excuse everybody. You can excuse people for being criminal, for being lazy, for being poor. You can almost excuse everybody, but what are you left with? No matter how you chop it down. If you want to get into the mathematics of this Punch and Judy 3D world, no matter how you chop it down, you do realize this, mathematically. So we can start cutting this piece of paper. We can cut it in half, and we can cut it in half. And in a 3D world, you all know this, you can cut this infinitely, mathematically speaking. So no matter what you do, you're still going to come out, even if you apparently are so progressive that you have narrowed down the foes, that you're way beyond any idea that, well, there's some kind of spirits loose in the world. Lucifers, Satans, anti-gods, that, regardless of I got to admit, as impressive as he was intellectually in his time, Flip Wilson singing "The Devil Made Me Do It," we could say that you believe that I am way beyond that. I no longer believe that. In fact, I do not even believe that people are inherently evil. Now, that was all right for my grandfather. I do believe this. There are people who have suffered unconscious traumas in their life that have made them, in ways that they may or may not suspect, now operate in manners not only that seem to be antisocial to others, but in the long run are even detrimental to their own best interests. And therefore, what we're trying to struggle against, what we must struggle against, is simply a lack of awareness. Oh, I don't want to say ignorance, but a need for further education. All right, so you can do that until you sweat bullets. You can do that until you change your height. And you're still going to come out with what? Opposition. Down to the point that you no longer perhaps even want to call it, that you do not even want to anthropomorphize it, but you're still talking about a foe. Even if you got down to a very vague, institutionalized level like human ignorance. You are in a losing battle, if indeed it were a fair battle, and if indeed there is something that might be of some interest to an individual here and there, other than waiting in line to be cut down, which is all right. Everybody needs fertilizer. Somebody died to fertilize you, and it's going to go on. But insofar as there might be a way to step out of line every now and then, or that you might find out how to be like the shadow and cloud men's minds and perhaps turn invisible and get out of line even, and nobody notice, and all kinds of other silly metaphorical descriptions, you have got to understand that what appears to be a foe, even if it appears to be the most reasonable, intellectually sound foe that you can imagine, all you're dealing with is a foe that you have already subdued. All right? All you're dealing with, I'll give it to you now, is a foe that you cannot subdue. Because if you apparently subdue it, if you got ignorance down and wrestled it and choked it and went, I give, and it said, I'm leaving town, I'll never come back, you would get up tomorrow, and you know what would be there, don't you? The duck's reflection. And you would never know it. Well, now, I'll give you this. There is a trap door. There is a way out in the city that if you wrestle it down tonight to keep him come back tomorrow, tonight all you got to do is die. So, I mean, I will point that out. But if you get up tomorrow, the duck's reflection is going to be there, and you're going to take it as being a new challenge, new opposition. Whining the same whine, moaning the same moan, thinking the same thing. The energy that you have, as long as you're standing in line, that you are forced to expend every day on the basis of disagreeing with life, criticizing life. When I started those examples, I said were invisible but everyday experience. I guess I started out with the exotic sounding ones when I said that energy, for instance, that is needed each day to disagree and critique. Well, what else do you do with opposition? Especially when it appears to be non-physical, that is, that you are not having to wrestle the horde sweeping down upon your village. You're not having to defend your family physically. It is now apparently you're having to defend the world of ideas, the world of better feelings. But with foes, what are you going to do? Well, at the very least, you're going to disagree with them. I mean, when they're wrong, you're not going to agree to other people's attitudes that are inhumane, that are prejudicial, hateful, antisocial. And as a good citizen, as a good human being, you'll obviously critique them. You must. You're going to fall back into whoever it was, Johnson or Poe's big old honey pit, and say, it's not required for good men to do evil. It's only required that good men do nothing in the face of evil. And so it is your duty to critique the opposition, even if it is institutionalized, even if you are so intellectually magnanimous that you no longer hold people responsible. Well, at least you don't in public. And you say, well, it's a kind of institutional poverty lack of education, opportunity, that makes people have rather limited views. They don't understand how we should all be sharing and what. It still requires that you critique. But notice the energy required to critique and to disagree. Well, I'm not sure that I do it that much. It doesn't take much. Well, you're right. All it does is take all the energy you got. That's all. You're right. It doesn't take anything unusual, now that I pointed it out. Does everybody want to repeat it again silently to ourselves? That to keep things unchanged simply requires all of the energy that everyone has. That's all it takes. Or I also threw in, that might have sounded a little suspicious, that part of this everyday expenditure is in the need for the energy required for you to inflict pain and to help support turmoil. Even I knew what I was doing when I used those terms. Those sound almost loaded. And of course I do not mean to inflict pain by whipping up upon your fellow man. But you are inflicting pain somewhere in all forms of opposition. But now you've got to at least be past the point for us to discuss it and say, well, the opposition deserves a little pain. I mean, we're talking about people, we're talking about bad ideas, if not real bad actors. We're talking about, if I'm not going to hold them responsible, and instead of me saying bad actors over here, bad attitudes, bad ideas. All right, to criticize them is to inflict pain. You cannot oppose anyone. You cannot go out, if you're going to be a boxer and after the bell rings, go out and offer to do your opponent's hair. Would you sit down? May I give you a trim? You know, that's not going to work. You are no longer in that particular contest. All forms of opposition, as long the archetypical idea of the Punch and Judy show, for those of you who don't know it, was interspersed continually with their little dialogue, was them just beating the holy stuffings out of each other, these little sticks. You are inflicting pain. You are helping spread turmoil by trying to help. Now, you're supposed to in the city. How else do we know the city's alive? It'd be ghost town, not just USA, but ghost town, planet Earth. Zip code 0000. But it takes all of the energy you have. It takes all the energy everyone has to disagree, to critique, to inflict pain, to help keep up the level of turmoil. And of course, I've mentioned several times, re-mentioned, that within that is also the rethinking of the same idea over and over, even though, as all of you know by now that's thought about it at all and observed it. From day to day, you don't even notice that. The intellect is not wired up to notice. And I'm not talking about those who might clinically be suffering from some sort of fanatical ED fix, thinking the same thing. all I can do is think of Nelson Eddy. We're not talking about that, of course. But you do not notice that you think the same thing over and over. And if I could in some way jump inside of your brain and your nervous system and say, well, look, here's an example. You do think, you thought this thing yesterday, you thought this thing an hour ago. If you're ordinary, you would very likely say, all right, and I see what you mean, but wait a minute. The thing I'm thinking about could be very defensible. You could say, well, what I'm thinking about is the economic injustice of life, or what I'm thinking about is the foolish behavior, at least the ideas, of the opposition party. Now, you're right, I do think about that because I worry about it. I think what can be done. That is the nature of the human intellect. Of course, if I was really foolish, I'd say, well, all right, I'm going to tell you the truth. I've been noticing you long before now. And you not only thought that yesterday, you thought that the day before that, the day before that, and the day before. And the person might go, well, you could be right. I have worried about it a long time. Then if I was really foolish and I'd said, well, what good's it done? Of course, that's reached the point of obscene foolishness because no one can see that. But the point being, again, to see that there is no natural conclusion. The sentence does not come to a satisfying end. If it did, it would be suicidal. And so the whole question of whether someone thinks the same thought over and over, whether they feel the same feel over and over, is to them even moot if I insisted that they do it and not aware of it, and who went, well, maybe you're right. Then they'd look at me like, so what? Because what they think over and over, what they feel over and over, if it was pointed out specifically to them, they would say is in their best interest. And eventually in all of humanity's best interest, because what they do think about over and over is what? Beneficial change or resistance to change. That is the opposition. How things should be better. I don't think about things all the time just to suit me. I don't think about the pleasures I'd like to have. No. I'm too big a person for that. I think a lot about how things are all messed up and how everybody else is dumb and stupid and pretty critical. We're running out of time, so I'm getting crude, of course. But notice that passes for being a thinking person, a humane person. If they say, well, I do not spend a lot of my time, not you mention it. I may repeat some of the things I think over and over. But I'll tell you this, most of these things are not me just dreaming about, boy, I wish I had a harem and I had all the free Jack Daniels I wanted, and that, James Brown was completely free and his band was over there in the library and was playing time I want to, and I had all my old electric trains. I don't think about that kind of stuff. Oh, every now and then I think about it. But you know what I really think about? And of course I would know, and you should know by now. You know what they really think about is bitch, 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 whine, 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 criticize, criticize, criticize. But if it was pointed out to them, they would say, yes, but it's well deserved. I don't mean just from my personal view. Just look at the stupidity of the opposition. Look at the terrible things humanity is doing to the planet, doing to one another, doing to children, doing to old people, doing to short people, doing to tall people, doing to fat people, doing to women, doing to men, doing to the animals, doing to the trees. Who have we left out? They would not see that as being open to any sort of question as to, well, what is the validity of this? To what profit is this to you personally? Well, I just told you, I don't worry that much about me personally. Of course, if I was a real smart ass, I'd say, and that's a good thing too, but I wouldn't say that. Well, see, I can say that every now and then because life and I have a certain understanding. Don't we? Yeah. Just want to be sure it was still in. That was still under warranty. Another little thing. Outside of all of this, talking about whatever we may mean around here, about talking about new intelligence or revolutionary thoughts, being able to see, to take in information, to process it in a way that's not possible when you're in the city, when your brain itself, the operations of your intellect is operating at that level and no other level. And opposed to that, if we're talking about fresh information, just to make it easy before the tape runs out, or whatever it is, the hell I might mean talking about revolutionary or fresh information, I was going to point out something that many of you have already had experience. I might as well go ahead and muck about with a description of a certain aspect. This kind of information, this kind of thinking, is so light, is so different, is so very, very different, that it does not even make the ordinary impression on your brain. It's important to those people that are drawn into this kind of vortex down somewhere in life's system. It's important, not in some serious way, but you know what I mean, those of you who know what I mean, and the rest of you can assume that you know what I mean. It all works out. As important as it is to you, as astounding is what you see, new information, new views. It is so different. I like light. If you can understand why I like that, even though it's a spatial description. But it is so different that compared to just everyday affairs, this stuff, this kind of new thinking, this kind of new information that seems so pertinent, so important, so pleasing, so meaningful to you, is so light, is so radically different, quantitatively, in every possible way, spatially, temporally. It's so different that compared to ordinary thoughts, it hardly makes any impression at all on your brain. Now, you've noticed that. To see things are astounding and turn away to spit, and you almost forgot them. Give it to you another. I'll put a little pillar, a leg on it. In this case, there is no ordinary mechanical energy available in life, ordinarily available, to reinforce or to re-impress the information on you later. Do you follow? You see something. You have your own revolutionary thought, view of something. And you know exactly what it is. You don't need to call it revolutionary. You don't have to tell anybody. But now enough of you know. And it's the kind of thing that just makes all this worthwhile. It's just something, and it may strike you, and it has such ramifications that it just comes damn close to explaining everything. I mean, it's that close. And you go to the bathroom. I mean, to do something as godly and as decent as take a leak, and you come out and you decide what you're going to sit down and finally write a whole book on philosophy, or at least write this down and look at it, and you go, what was it? And you can hardly piece together what the thought was. I guess I've waited a long time to ever go through this, because I'm sure that some of you then have thought that you do still have some opposition, that you felt bad, my memory is failing, my brain's not strong enough. This kind of stuff is so far removed. It is so different. It is so light from ordinary information. And also, that there are no energies, things are not arranged in ordinary life in any way to reinforce this. It's simply not. It's not a dirty trick. It's not something lacking on your part. The information is so foreign to that which is necessary now, it has no natural opposition which would reinforce it, which would be like putting a stronger stamp on your brain when you thought about it. Because, all right, well, look at all these great thoughts that you've had and that you understand. Enough of you, I knew you would. It wasn't a test on my part, or it wasn't a guess. That these things, and you think about, and Jesus, by the time you can go find a pencil, you can barely remember what it was. But compared to that, you move to a new apartment, and as hungry as you get at night, and you look down the phone book to find where the nearest pizza place is that delivers, and you look down there one time with that phone number, all right, maybe twice, and you go, 555, that's the way they do it in Hollywood now, so that you won't call the real number, 555-2724. 555-2724, 555-2724. And that's it, Charlie. You can live at that apartment another year, and you got that number down. And yet, later that night, you were looking out the window, trying to get a piece of anchovy out of your tooth, and suddenly you realize life is kind of like an unwanted anchovy. And then it struck you almost a complete picture, a personal picture inside of your own brain of the meaning of life, how the universe is put together. And geez, and you go up to just walk around or get a breath of fresh air, or get a drink of water, and you walk over and pick up a pencil and your important notebook, and it was something about anchovies. As important as that is, it's like it is so light, it's like a butterfly landing on your brain, and it can fly away, and you can't really find any footsteps. The same as a butterfly landing on a beach. It just almost made no impression. There is nothing in life to reinforce it. And one way to look at it is, there is no natural opposition. But the energies mechanically, mathematically, physically, electrically in life, as they affect and impress and weigh on man's brain, in every other part, but specifically on the brain, there is nothing to reinforce this. You see it, and it is almost so light, so ephemeral, that it flies away and it almost leaves no impression. It's not to give you the blues. It is so radically different that to even compare it with a butterfly landing on a beach is to overstate it. How close are we to the end of the tape? 3 minutes. Well, let's see. I can kill 3 minutes. Okay. There was a priest, a rabbit, and a butterfly waiting on a bus. Bye. Let's do the epilogue. Of course, the real Joe man. Huh? All right. What I thought, I ignore, that's not the word, but I fear that some of you in the other cities are getting these on a regular basis, that I don't say enough. And I get all the reports, and I keep up with what's going on, all the information you send me, which is at least minimally what I've asked for. But still, to look you dead in the little camera eye. And to let you know that every night and every time we're here, and throughout the day anyway, since now, whether you and I like it, well, hell, what does it matter to you? Whether I like it or not, it's like I've taken on hundreds of new relatives. But at any rate, I thought I would take the occasion and perhaps send out greetings in a little epilogue in a manner perhaps more personal or more pertinent to the locales. For instance, before I do what I was thinking about. For instance, if I were going to send out greetings of a more specifically tailored nature to our friends in Germany to say, Auf Wiener Schnitzel. To the Middle East to say, Shalomi. But I was thinking more specifically to those that be getting this circa, I must love to say circa, May 1990, let's start off for greetings specifically to those in the southern part of North Havana, Miami, that is. Que pasa, y'all? To the LA, the Southern California crowd, caramba, dude. To the Pacific Northwest and the adjoining areas. Did you bring the raincoat? Well, and of course, the good old New York people that I guess we can come up using these since you see what the shtick was. Perhaps the example, being able to use the New Yorkers and the people there, the exemplary salutation known by all in that area would be like, hey, what you looking at? Bye, y'all.